welcome Maria to the show.
Thank you so much, Ian.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, as I've been tracking your work for some time, as one who seems to be clearly on the trail of women and mythology, which is, of course, the name of your Instagram and your podcast. And somewhere along the way, I think, you became aware of what I was up to, and we sort of kind of like high-five each other, I think, from across the globe. And the idea of having a shared conversation at some point bubbled up. And that's how it led to this, which with the intention of, I'd love to really hear about your own work, in particular, sharing more about the foundational text in a similar way that Iron John is for the mythopoetic men's movement. Women Who Run with Wolves always has this kind of, mythic dimension of sort of birthing, or at least marking a moment for women in this path as well. And so I just thought it'd be fun to have a conversation to hear you and how you've worked with it, why it's so important, and maybe some of a myth actually might be told along the way. So once again, thanks for joining me here, Maria.
Thank you, Ian. It's an honor to be here. And I feel it all began for me with Women Who Run with the Wolves, actually through Martin Shaw. I am a student of Martin. I know you've worked with him several times, and he's a collaborator of your work. And I did my master's with him in ecology and spirituality in the UK. And during that time, I really enjoyed the way Martin brought myth to life and showing how it can be a piece and a tool for our contemporary life. However, Martin is a very masculine man. And I was in my own healing journey as a woman. I was in my early 20s, and I needed something different, something that felt feminine, something that touched me in a different place in my heart, and spoke about the initiations that I was living and I was dealing with. And I picked up Women Who Run with the Wolves. I'm originally from Brazil, and the book is very popular there. It's a big book. So I definitely had come across before. I actually had a copy in Portuguese, but I was never able to actually read it and to tackle it, because it can be a difficult book if you are not familiar with the poetic language of it, or even the language of myth. So it was actually through my master's that I started reading it, and I would bring things to Martin Shaw, and he would help me kind of decipher it and better understand it. And then slowly I started doing little groups at my school, in which I would tell the story and I would bring the things that I was learning and discovering. And that's how it shaped actually our first program, our first course. It started as these study groups. And once I left the school, I continued doing it, and it evolved into the course that I have today. You mentioned you would like a story from the book.
Yeah. How about let's do a little more groundwork, and then I'd love to turn it over to you, hear a bit of the story. So that's beautiful. I love the connection with Martin. And as a little side note for myself, I actually read that book before I read Iron John, because when I was deep in my filmmaking journey, I worked on a film that I co-created with my co-director Nicole Sorkin called Amplify Her, which was actually looking at women in the DJ scene, actually DJs and producers. And as I got curious around kind of the mythic archetypal world, that book, of course, swam to the surface pretty quickly. And so I actually ended up reading that as my entry into mythopoetics, and I only read Iron John actually a number of years later. And so it was just interesting to me actually that my kind of journey into mythopoetics actually also started mostly with that book as well. I'd love to hear for you so in the same way that Iron John occupies a kind of it's like seminal force within this lineage, I'd be curious to hear for you maybe a bit of like the historical circumstances around that book, both from the author, like what was she responding to, why did she feel that this was a book needed, what was she trying to say, or anything that helps the listener have a sense of like how did this come into being and why was it so important?
This is a great question. The book was published in 1990, so it's been 35 years now, and it's still very relevant. Clarissa, she says that it took her over 30 years to write the book. and published in 1990. So it is in many ways a prisma. It has so many different facets. Each story, each chapter brings a different initiation for a woman's life. And I find them very timeless, even if it was published 35 years ago, because these are journeys of the soul. The examples she brings, they might be a little bit dated sometimes, but the initiation that is behind the archetypal journey is eternal in some ways. I see that not just Clarissa, but other authors published around the time and gain a lot of traction with their books because there was a rise in psycho-spiritual work at that time. There was, I think, a need for poetic language, a welcoming to that, while at the same time a rise for women's conversations. And The Heroine's Journey is also a book that kind of stands out, not exactly at that period of time, but in the same genre. Goddesses in Every Woman by Jean Shinoda Boland. That's actually 1990, if I'm not mistaken. So there was a rise in these topics, in these types of material.
Mm. And what did you know about the impact at the time? Because I know, like, for example, Iron John, I've heard lots of stories of, it totally ignited something for men in the culture. Like men's groups were, they were gathering now in the hundreds in gyms across America. And there was just like a big thing. It's 62 weeks on the bestseller list. Feminist groups, saying it was all about toxic. I didn't use toxic masculinity then. Although the term toxic masculinity comes from a fellow, Shepard Bliss, who was writing about the movement at the time, not to refer to this, but basically there was a big culture impact with Iron John, and again, continues to be in different ways. But I'm curious for you, what was the initial response of the book at the time, and what was sort of ignited, or was it a bit of a slow burn that kind of made its way, secretly through women's covens and things?
I think it took a little while, but then it became a bestseller quite fast. It's still, and it's so funny how it still is a bestseller, and it shows up and it pops up in different countries as a best-selling, top 10, something like that. In Brazil, for example, there are always new editions being published. Still today in the US too, new editions being published. In Brazil, we have some really beautiful ones, hardcover, red, just absolutely gorgeous. I was being born. I actually was born in 1990, the year the book was published. So I wouldn't know exactly what, the felt experience of the years that followed the publishing. But I have today women in my program who come, and they are a few decades older than me. And they always say, like, oh, I read this book when it came out and it was so special. And I had a group of women and we would discuss it. And I think it really responded to a time where women were starting to look more into their spiritual life. Because the first wave of feminism, if we think about it, they were very much focused, especially white feminism, but they were very much focused in developing our professional life, going into the public realm from that political standpoint, which is definitely an important one, and a kind of equality we want to reach and need to continue searching and fighting for. But then the book actually talks about another part of ourselves. It talks about our soul self, and how can that be also cultivated, nourished, protected? Because it's not just women's rights that are being targeted, but a woman's soul and a woman's soul life is also targeted. It's also robbed. So I think it fed into that as well, just showing women that there is not just our rights, not just our professional lives, our careers to be fought for, but also our soul must be cultivated.
Mm. And what would you say then is the power of myth, in particular for women? And maybe I also feel like for you personally, as you've been working with myth for some time, even before you found the book, but as you experience women experiencing the book or experiencing the mythic landscape, what are they finding there that, as you say, is related to the cultivation of soul?
It feels to me that myth in this context, specifically of the program, of the book, it gives language to women. And things that weren't seen suddenly are very clear. It awakens. As Martin Shaw beautifully says, it's not the business of enchantment, it's not the business of escape, it's the business of waking up. And that's what this book does. And the myths that are there, they wake us up. They allow women to see things that are happening in their inner life or in their even outer life and context that's and suddenly awaken for that. Suddenly feel that it's not something that needs to be forgotten, that we need to pretend it's not there, or that clearly we can't see it. It becomes visible. And once it becomes visible, it becomes conscious. And fortunately, myth not only makes it visible, but it gives us clues and tools on how to deal with it. It gives us a little path, something that we can slowly and gently touch for the next steps. So it just doesn't leave us there like with a new insight hanging, but it gives us something to follow.
Beautiful. As I'm recalling, I haven't looked at the chapter list for some time, but I remember some of them that maybe are more recognizable. There's the skeleton woman, I believe, right there. That's a very powerful one. There's Bluebeard, which I don't know, maybe it's called Bluebeard, I think, but it's the character of Bluebeard, and yeah, very very powerful. I remember reading that, and of course the Handless Maiden as well. I'm curious for you, what are other stories for you that just stand out within that book?
I love Sealskin Soulskin is a Selkie myth. It's a story about a woman who has her pelt, her skin stolen, and the pelt is a symbol of our soul. So that is stolen. After a while, that is not given back to her. She begins to wither. She loses her vitality, and she needs to go on through a journey of recovering that pelt and making a very difficult choice about how do we live between the land and the sea, the soul and the outer life. It's a beautiful story about our cycles. I love Manaway. It's a story about the integration of the ego and soul, the outer and the inner life. It works a lot with this dualism, but in a way that it shows we must keep ourselves integrated. A woman who is only being led by soul will probably find herself in very difficult situations in the outer world. That organization is important. However, a woman who only develops the outer life might find herself lacking meaning, purpose, a feeling of something deeper. So it's a myth that talks about this integration and how to keep it united. The myth of the Russian folktale of Vasilisa. It's a very famous one. The encounter with Baba Yaga, the recover of intuition. I think that's also another very important lesson for women, and really bringing the first image of that story in which the good mother dies. The story begins with this mother dying, and Vasilisa then, after a little while, becoming the stepdaughter of an evil stepmother and the stepsisters. And she then remembers she has her doll. She needs to find Baba Yaga. So she is actually letting go of the archetype of the too good mother that serves and protects and keeps life very safe. And she's welcoming a new mother in the psyche, a wild mother. Baba Yaga is that. Clarissa calls her the wild goddess, the hag in that sense. So learning about this is also an important one for me. La Llorona, Mexican folktale. Beautiful. I love it. Not everyone does. Are you familiar with that?
No. I must have read it, but I don't remember it now. Yeah.
La Llorona is a story of a woman who she is a very humble origins in Mexico, and a fidalgo from Spain comes and courts her, and she's very beautiful. They have 2 children, and after a while, he says to her, I will now go back to Spain and marry a woman of a noble birth, the woman my family chose for me. And she gets so enraged, in such despair, in such grief, that she tears his face, grabs the children, goes to the nearby river, and throws them in the water. They sink and drown and die. And she then, in her grief, also falls in and drowns and dies. She ascends to heaven, and there at the gates they say to her, "You may enter because you have suffered. However, you need to go back and find the souls of your two children." And La Llorona returns to the river, and she searches and searches and searches for them. And that is why, till today in Mexico and some places in Central and South America, it is said that children should never go near a river at dark because La Llorona might mistaken them for her children. And this is a cautionary tale. You know, it's La Llorona became quite popular. They even did a horror movie on her, because she is a figure that is very much alive in Central South America, as this mythic figure. But it's a story about a woman who doesn't care for her creative life. The children here, they're not our biological children. They are our creative potential. What are the dreams, the desires, the projects? What are the things that we are meant to give birth to in this world? And how do we give proper care? How do we raise them to life? How do we protect them? You know, how do we let them have their own life in some ways as well? As
Mm-hmm.
parents, we know that it's about early ages, protecting, nurturing, caring, giving all because they can't. But then after a while, letting them evolve and grow in their own way. That's the journey that La Llorona is not able to complete in the story. So it serves as a cautionary tale for us. That's a tale I
Mm-hmm.
deeply love because it has helped me nurture my creative life. And I am a deep believer that a woman's creative life, is her precious jewel, you know, her secret superpower. It will feed her in emotional ways, intellectual ways, financial ways, even spiritually. It will feed her in so many levels that when a woman lets go of it, lets it die at the bottom of the river, she will start withering. She will start losing her vitality.
Mm. Yeah, powerful. I understand there's another story as well you spoke to, possibly sharing, the Loba, if that's true. This might be a good moment.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a key piece of the book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. The book, for those who are not familiar with it, it has roughly, depending on the edition, around 16 chapters. Every chapter, Clarissa brings a main story and then commentary. Sometimes within the commentary, she adds secondary stories, even sometimes two or three, to make a point, to bring an idea in. And La Loba is in the first chapter. It's the story she brings very little commentary. There are chapters in which, of course, depending on the edition, she tells the story and the commentary is up to 30, 40 pages. This one has two or three. So I feel she gives us this story and she doesn't give us much commentary because she just wants the story to take root within us. It's not really about rationalizing it, analyzing it to down to the T. You know, it's just for us to receive it and let the image of La Loba kind of guide the exploration of the book. So I'll share with you this tale. It begins with a desert, a very beautiful, wide, hot, warm desert. And there lives this woman, La Loba, wolf woman, La Huesera, the ones who collect the bones. And she collects all sorts of bones, rattlesnake bones, bird bones, deer bones, but her specialty are the bones of wolves. She collects these bones deep in the arroyos, deep in the valleys, deep in the different places of the desert, and she brings it back to her cave. And she places the bones there. And when she feels that she has enough bones, a full skeleton, she sits down, she lights a fire, and she starts arranging the bones in the form of a skeleton, the skeleton of a wolf. She places the tailbones where they need to be, the bones of the legs, the face, the spine, with such care, such consideration, such wisdom as well. And as she looks at it and she sees that beautiful white skeleton complete in front of her, she takes a moment, she thinks of a song, she finds a song, and she begins to sing. She sings and sings and sings. She lifts her arms and she sings over that skeleton. The floor, the ground of the desert shakes. The cave shakes as she sings. And slowly, that skeleton begins to take shape. It begins to transform itself into a wolf. The tail, the legs, the face, till the top of the ears. And in a quick moment, the wolf, as it forms itself, blink open, closes its eyes, and runs out of the cave, running and running and running free. Maybe, we are not sure why, but it's the way that it splashes through the little river, or the way the sunlight or the moonlight hits just the corner of its body. The wolf transforms itself into a laughing woman, and it runs free and wild through the desert. And if you, Ian, or you, listener, find yourself walking through the desert, certainly tired, maybe lost, La Loba might take a liking to you and show you something of the soul.
Wonderful.
So, a little short story, one of those pastoral stories, and that Clarissa gives us at the beginning of the book to really bless the journey, I think. Bless the reading, bless that moment, that first connection. The bones here are, well, before I tell you this, Ian, is there a moment in the story that kind of comes alive to you? Is there an emotion, a feeling? Do you see yourself at any part of this tale?
I mean, the strong image for me was the singing to the bones, right? That's always an aspect of like enlivening and like in fleshing, or there's something around that language and in fleshing, and there's something powerful about that alchemy. And the image of the laughing, transforming, becoming the woman through the desert. I mean, I also had this image come to me of that the book itself is La Loba, right? Coming to the reader, coming to equip them with an energy and a vitality to go on the journey, as you said, through the book itself. And so, to feel that spirit like enlivening me into the journey ahead, was powerful.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. And I even see the way the bones, Clarissa brings it to us as pieces of our soul. The bones are something very difficult to be destroyed. And the only thing we possess that is difficult to be destroyed is our soul. So they are these little pieces that we must go around the desert being our psyche, really. And we must go around the desert and find these different pieces. And an example for me, some pieces are myth and mythic work. A specific story could be a piece. Motherhood is a piece for me. And my relationship with my creative life. A heartbreak is also a piece. And what are the different pieces of our soul? Some wounds are pieces of our soul. Some elements that bring us joy. Ocean, for example, for me is a piece of our soul, of my soul. And how can we bring that and integrate it into one skeleton? That work of sitting down and placing each piece in its right place, it's also an important one. I even tell to my participants, my students now, that I have 2 kids and I'm a stepmom too, so 3. And my 2 are very little. My oldest is 3 years old and my youngest 1.5. So motherhood I'm in those, the trenches of it. And I say to them, I'm in an exercise now, in a moment, in a practice of getting my bone of motherhood and placing it somewhere in that skeleton that is not the center. And I'm in this movement. I moved it there because for now that what's made sense. And now I'm trying to move it back in a place and find the place in my skeleton, in my soul, that it makes sense for me. And then the pieces, these bones, they can be pieces of our soul, but we can look at it in the book as pieces of the book itself. Each story is a bone. Each motif there, each archetype we will meet is a bone. If the book is entitled Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories for the Wild Woman Archetype. If we are tracking the wild woman archetype throughout the book, each story is a way of meeting this archetype from a different facet, from a different perspective. If we're tracking the wild woman archetype, each bone is a piece of her, is a piece of this archetypal image as well. So I invite my students to always look at it in this way. And the singing over the bones, that image you mentioned, it called to you. It's a very powerful one. No, singing over the bones, breathing life. She sings from that place of soul voice. She doesn't press play on Spotify and, let it go. She brings it from the depth of her soul. As she does that, she is breathing life into her soul. Because one thing is for us to do a little list, right, with all the pieces of our soul. Write it down on a paper. It's work, but it's quite easy. If you've done some soul searching, you can name it. But how can you bring these pieces to life? How can you bring parenthood to life, spirituality to life, relationship to nature to life? How can you bring that? And that's the work she is doing, because that's what's required for the skeleton to shapeshift into wolf and then shapeshift into woman. And there's this multiplicity that happens in many myths. I'm sure you've seen other myths in which this happens. We have the bones into animal and then into women form or men form. And that's also a beautiful image of we are transforming. There are we are wolf women running free in the desert.
Many beautiful threads there. And, what struck me as you were speaking too is this idea of a corresponding myth to the soul bones, right? That how necessary it is, I think, I'll speak for women for a second, of, in a time where the kind of mythic dimension is often absent, right? And there's this kind of longing that, men carry, and of course, the women carry, for some sense of like a map of the terrain, right? Of like to understand their experience of what they're going through. And I can see, like, motherhood, for example, it's one thing to just get like information on how to mother, right? Like how to breastfeed, or, sleep training, and, all the kind of like mundane day-to-day dimensions, right, of motherhood. But then it's quite another to then get a myth that speaks to the alchemical force and encounter with motherhood as the bones of one's soul. And to me, that's like an absolutely vital aspect that I'll just assume, I think, that so many mothers don't have, certainly ones that have grown up in a sort of demythologized cultural context, right? And so in the same way that, for Iron John, that really tapped a longing in a lot of men for some kind of pathway into maturation, the initiatory journey of men from adolescent to adulthood, that I suspect, these stories are that kind of, those beings or those encounters with the soul that make sense, that help women make sense of, all these different thresholds and aspects that it is to be a full human being. So how important that is. And of course, every intact culture has a very robust mythic inheritance, it seems, right, for this very reason, to give at certain moments and to entrust to members of that particular community. So I wonder what you might speak to that in terms of the legacy we're also seeing around as women begin to sort of revivify the myths and the effects that you see on them.
I love the mythic sensibility that women gain and deepen when they are working with stories, and especially if it's not just, that one encounter that you listen to a story and you go about your life, but if it is a recurring thing. Actually, this year I offered a program that it's called A Year of Myths, starting in January and finishes in December. So it's a one myth per month. It's not on women who run with the wolves. They are other myths. And it's really about keeping the mythic thread alive. I think when a person, it doesn't need to be men or women, but a person does that, they begin to see life from different perspective. And you spoke about this maturation that helps. And regardless of the age we are at, right, and the stage we are at in our life, there is always something to be matured. One of the things that kind of struck me in what you said as well, I said, like, we become, let's say, parents, and we tend to the physical things. We transform in the ways that we are concerned about that. But do we let it mold our consciousness, and shift the way we relate to the world in general? I can say that, for example, motherhood for me, it has shifted the way I relate to nature and I relate to my own spirituality. And I feel myth is a door and a container for that at the same time. It gives me maps, really, and mirrors to work with that, to allow us to go deeper.
I'm curious, as you also now are situated at the kind of maybe ongoing inquiry of women in mythology, how would you characterize this moment? Because, I have spoken at different times on what I see as the renaissance of mythopoetic men's work, and how that looks now with different teachers and men's organizations, right, that are coming together. Recently, or I should say last year, I visited the 40th anniversary of the Minnesota Men's Conference, started by Bly, and I have a new essay coming out very soon, probably by the time this is out. And it's part of my role, I see, as like kind of understanding, right, what's out there in this new bloom around mythology. And so I wonder, for women, like, what do you see happening? And, what's most exciting for you from your seat?
I am not sure if it's because I'm very much into it. Now when I even go on social media or something, my feed is just mythology and all of it. So I don't know if it's me within my bubble, but I do see an opening more towards mythic knowledge, stories, understanding of the archetypes, interest, really, from different fields. And, the muses in Greek myth, the sisters, they're the muses. They are inspiring creativity in many ways. And we see it as they are sisters, that all the art forms and the creative forms, they are connected. So I also see not just a resurgence of myth and mythic language and mythic interest and stories and all of it, but I think in times of technology, of AI, and everything being, systems, everything being automatized, there is an interest into the arts, into the things that perhaps AI can't do or not do the way we wanted them to do. Or just, I feel a little bit around that, that there is an interest in things that are not related to the computer, to the screens anymore. And people want to connect with each other. They want to connect to the numinous as well. And myths, for me, myths are a numinous. They are a center part of my spirituality in many ways.
Beautiful. So how can women in particular connect with your work?
Come and listen to the Women in Mythology podcast. That is free. That is in all platforms. I think that's a great way of getting familiar with the work. On season 1, I actually tell each story of the book Women Who Run with the Wolves and add my own commentary on it. So if you also want to deepen into the book, that's a great place to start. And then visit my website. Come see the different courses I have offered. There are a lot of self-paced recorded courses and then some live courses available from time to time. And if you use Instagram, search me there at Women in Mythology. I always share little nuggets and little things to inspire.
So what's next for you?
In next year, in 2026, I'll be diving into a lot of Brazilian myths. So, looking into my own country and myths and folk tales that are not very familiar. So, you even mentioned in the beginning, like Bluebeard, right? And Vasilisa, I mentioned that there are so many wonderful stories out there already with great commentary from fantastic authors. And I love them and I learned so much through them. Taught many of them in my courses, but I'm now feeling the desire to bring myths and folk tales that are not yet that well known, and something very unique. So if you'd like to explore and get to know different myths, new myths, check out the work and stay tuned because something very special is coming.
Amazing. Well, I'll make you a bet. If you keep going, I will. So
Thank you so much. For sure. It's a lifelong, labor of love, lifelong journey.